This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 553, entitled Masculists Teach Women to Hate Women Who Commit Massive Gender Crimes Against Men. Description. Masculists aim to teach women to hate women who commit massive gender crimes against men, so that those women who do empathize with men's massive oppression by women can become female masculists and vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws to liberate men. Those women who can't empathize with men this way will be severely punished by not getting a man. Masculisted men have a hatred of women who so badly oppress them and refuse to have relationships with women who do not empathize with men's hatred of women who oppress them so badly over decades. Masculisted men are becoming increasingly bitter and full of hate towards women who oppress them so badly and aim to exterminate them slowly by having nothing to do with them, forcing them to rot on the shelf. Now the flyer itself. Masculists teaching women to hate women who commit massive gender crimes against men, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I have an on-again, off-again girlfriend who has sent me 3 Dear John emails over the past 2 years. Normally, any woman who did such a thing to me would be given a short chop by me. But this particular woman has so many positives from my perspective that I really hesitate to do that and prefer to find compromises, since giving her the total chop would probably cost me more than I would gain. I've been e-dating for about 3 years since I've been in Australia, and have been appalled at the incredibly low level of education of women of my age in this country. In brackets, I'll be 3/4 of a century old in a month of writing this, July 2022. When I was living in the US, in the zeros, I quickly learned to insist that my e-dates had to have at least a master's so as not to be too stupid for my professorial tastes. No false modesty here. I have a Prof. Doctor in front of my name, so have to have a woman of comparable intelligence. Otherwise I get quickly bored with her, lose respect for her, and then end the relationship. But this woman is smart, warm, fun, literate, educated, sexy, generous, etc. Like I say, she has many pluses, but her big negative is that she doesn't have an intuitive, emotional level understanding of masculinist hatred of women who commit massive gender crimes against men. And neither does her son, who is probably even more blue-pilled than she is, who strongly dislikes my hate-based masculism, thus causing her to choose between her loyalty to him or to me. And since he is her son, of course, being a woman, she chooses her son. So I have a problem. As I see it, the solution to this problem is merely to teach women the masculinist hatred of women who commit massive gender crimes against men. If my on-again, off-again girlfriend can be thus persuaded, then probably her son can be too, and probably more easily, since he is a man, and can probably relate more readily to how women oppress men so badly than she can. This young man is about to become a father, so from the masculinist viewpoint he will start to play Russian roulette with his life, risking a 1 chance in 4 of being butchered in the hated, fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system. He should know about this, but he doesn't. All he knows about concerning gender politics is what he has picked up from the feminists, thus making him as monoconscious as the feminists, who know nothing of masculinist ideas, so by default have traditional expectations of men, seeing men in the divorce courts as mere cash machines to be abused and robbed, forced to pay for women to raise their, that is the women's, kids, with no legal nor moral obligation on these fluffy women to get off their fat parasitic asses and fip up. Masculists have a real hatred for the fluffy feminists who butcher one father in 4 this way, a real hatred. Divorce rape is one of the big 3 ways in which women deeply oppress men, oppressing them for decades of men's lives, which makes these women's oppressions of men far more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. For Masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is relatively small beer in comparison with the big 3 ways that women oppress men, and for decades, namely women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fatherhood. Masculists need to teach women that they should hate the gender criminality of women who commit these massive, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, and to teach men the same thing. If the Masculists can succeed in teaching women about the criminality of the big 3 ways that women oppress men, then teaching men the same should be a lot easier, since these other men are of the same sex, so have the same brain architecture, so should be more on the same frequency as the Masculists than are women, with all women's alien, that is, femalian natures. I'm always puzzled at this inability of my on-again, off-again girlfriend. She seems incapable of feeling any real empathy for men regarding how women so massively oppress men with their hateable, decades-lasting gender crimes against men. I do wonder, is it simply due to her ignorance of masculinist ideas? Has she not absorbed them well enough to be able to understand how hateable these gender crimes are that women commit against men? Is it because she is female and perhaps thus genetically incapable of ever having a real emotionally intuitive understanding and a hatred of women who commit these massive gender crimes against men? In a world population of several billion women, then of course some of them will have the ability to understand readily what the Masculists are talking about when Masculists say that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes last decades and are thus much more oppressive than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. Those women who do understand will become the female Masculists, who will become the allies of the Masculists, and will be able to help the Masculists significantly by voting with men for the menfairing of the gender laws. For example, by voting for the establishment of GECs, that's GECs, in the parliaments. GECs equals Gender Equality Committees, that consist half of female feminists and half of male Masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is definitely not the case today, where nearly everyone of both sexes have been totally brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street, a lesson that has been taught by the feminists, who have had a gender political monopoly for the past 6 decades. But now it's the turn of the Masculists to liberate men from the oppressions of the traditional manslave role of the man, by putting tremendous moral pressure on women to fip up, given that women have, thanks to men, a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral duty to work, to get career competent educations so that they can be FIPs as adults and not expect to be fluffies, living off the labour and money of a man, which would make such women man-slavers, utterly hated by the Masculists, who aim to wipe them out, to exterminate them by totally ignoring them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, totally ignored by men, by Masculisted men, not even pumped and dumped, so that their fluffy parasite genes are removed from the gene pool. Masculists see manslavery by fluffies as far and away the greatest of all gender crimes in any direction, that is from male to female or female to male. Since to Masculists, decades-long manslavery is slavery, so as to be hated and a war issue. So the Masculists are at war against the fluffies and the fluffy feminists, who are even more hated than the fluffies, since it is bad enough that fluffy feminists are fluffies and hence manslavers, but they're also hypocrites and genociders, since they hypocritically want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men to share equally the burden of earning the living by not fipping up, and expect men to be manslaves to them. Thus they behave as feminists in the parliaments, but as fluffies in the divorce courts, and hence earn the hatred of the Masculists for their awful hypocrisy. But worse, these hypocritical fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts are indirect genociders, since they so abuse and rob divorcing fathers that they have made divorce so toxic for men that young men see what happens to their fathers, their uncles, their older male friends, and decide to avoid marriage and paternity, since they do not want to fall into the same trap as their older male acquaintances, who get divorce raped by the hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. So in many countries now, 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, and choose to live the MGTOW lifestyle. That is, they go their own way, spending their money on themselves, thus crashing the birth rate. But they are merely reacting to the toxicity of divorce created by the hated fluffy feminists who control these courts, who have no empathy with the divorcing fathers whose lives they are ruining. One father in 4. Hundreds of millions of men destroyed on a daily basis, day in, day out. No wonder in Germany now, divorcing fathers are threatening the lives of female gender politicians who push the status quo in the divorce courts. Masculists have such a bitterness and hatred of the fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts that they state that, quote, "No culture that butchers the lives of one father in 4 can remain intact. Men will snap, pick up arms and go on a sex war, assassinating the gender politicians who are butchering them and murdering thousands of fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges who are committing these massive gender crimes against men. That is very much a war issue to Masculists, that Masculists feel fully justified in hating. Such monstrosities should be hated, and if women, if feminists fail to understand and to empathize with this Masculist hatred of something that absolutely, in capital letters, should be hated, then relations between the sexes will only get a lot worse, as Masculisted men viscerally reject women who fail to empathize with men, who are so abusively mistreated by these hated fluffy feminists. Masculist and MGTOW ideas are rapidly spreading now, thanks to the internet. So in a few years, nearly all the intelligent, educated men will have been influenced by them, who will then express their Masculist expectations on women. And if the women continue to fail to empathize with men regarding how women oppress men so badly, as is the case with my own on-again, off-again girlfriend, then millions of women are literally going to have their faces slapped by very angry, hateful, bitter Masculists, who will simply dump these women and have relationships with women who are female masculists, thus putting tremendous moral pressure on women to become female masculists, or they will be cast out of society and spat in their faces by masculisted men who will not tolerate these monoconscious feminists, whom the Masculists label as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, or shibbers, that's SHB, or as equals sexist hypocritical bigots, who stubbornly remain monoconscious, who insist that gender oppression is a one-way street, when to the Masculists it is so obviously not. This is the end of part 1.